Awesome. Yeah, that was great.
A long time talking about the letters. The lines are building right now. It's like 20 minutes away. Hopefully everyone in the same building is actually playing.
Let's get started. This is going to be ships and modules. Louder? Oh, not you louder. Let me let it. Okay. I wasn't asking for applause. I was saying it's just going to be ships and modules. But. All right. I'm CCP Rise. Here's what we're going to do. Pretty standard schedule for the ship and module talk. I'm going to go over some of the stuff that we've done in the last year. Not everything, but a lot of it. And then talk about some stuff that's coming up in the short term that you guys haven't heard about yet. And then from there, move on to some of the stuff we're thinking about looking a little longer term. So let's just jump right in. One of the first things in the last bit, like since Las Vegas, was actually the Assault Frigate Balance Pass. This was a super fun one to do. It was one of the last classes that really had kind of low activity and no clear purpose. And so it was easy to go in and just kind of make it better and pull usage up quite a bit. So we increased space speed, we increased capacitor, we added the assault damage control, and we gave specific buffs and reworks to these 3 ships especially, but all of them got little tweaks. You can see here, look at the activity change for assault frigates. It's really good. This is stacked for all of it, so it's going up by between double and triple depending on the week you check in the last year. That looks really healthy. And by the way, I'm going to show a bunch of graphs that use this metric, which is kind of a combined activity metric. It's looking at jumps, losses, people with the ship active, how many times the ship's changed into active. So it's just sort of a broad look at activity. It's obviously got issues if you're trying to compare across classes, but it's really good, especially just looking within a class at how each ship compares and how it's changing over time. So get used to that. With assault frigates, you can see it a bit in this graph, but it's a lot easier to see if you unstack it. The retribution stands out a lot. It's no surprise there, and it's actually, we're okay with having one ship in the class that's kind of setting a standard for the rest and standing out quite a bit. It was probably a little too much, so where it starts to trail there, we went in and lowered the speed a little bit, and you can see from there it's dropping back down towards the rest of the group. Another interesting thing with assault frigates that from the distance you guys are at might be a little hard to see is that the Jaguars actually crept up to being, it's fighting for the second most popular. That group fighting for second is Wolf, Enyo, and Jaguar. Caldari definitely kind of in back as far as this group goes, but yeah, it's looking good. Basically, we're really happy with how this went. And that's true for the assault damage control in general as well. This was something we were excited to try. It helped carve out more of a role for hacks. I have some more pictures of that later, but giving more support to the role as a fleet ship with a good response to alpha was something we've talked about doing in a few different ways over the last few years, and this ended up being a really healthy way to do it. So that worked out really well. Around the same time, we did a battleship quality of life pass. We gave extra cargo and lock range to pretty much all battleships. This didn't affect battleship activity at all, usage or efficiency, which isn't surprising, but it means they feel nicer to use for all the folks that were already doing it, and that's just fine. Next, around the same time, we put MJDs on Tier 3 battlecruisers. Unsurprisingly, not a massive effect on activity. In fact, you can't find when the change is on this graph. This is the entire last year. Again, just that combined activity metric. They're just bouncing around, and this is actually one of the other groups that's still sitting super low for overall usage, and we'll probably revisit them sometime soon and try to get them back into the meta somehow. Along with that, we did a set of nerfs to some pretty dominant ships in the meta. This is the Orthrus. The red arrow here is when the change came in, and you can see that usage actually didn't change massively. It went down maybe 20 or 30%, but of course, that's just because the ship's still good doesn't mean this isn't having a really positive effect. Now when you run into them, they're not as oppressive, they're not as fast, not as tanky, so that's great. And actually, for most of these changes, it looks pretty similar. This is the Ferox. Again, you can see a drop when we made the change, but it's not massive, and obviously Feroxes are really still really prominent in the fleet meta. We were actually just having another conversation with the CSM at the summit about whether or not they're still too strong, and we need to try and look for more room for some other battlecruiser doctrines, just because Feroxes are so efficient and project so well. So that's something we may revisit as well. Around the same time, we hit Macarials. This one's especially interesting because it was a pretty big change. The doctrine fits that everyone was using kind of went out the window. We shifted some slots around and some bonuses, and despite that, activity for the ship, it's down, but it's still very healthy. Macarial is still one of the most popular battleships in the game, despite definitely having a huge effect on its role in the fleet meta. Now onto some buffs. This is the Muninn activity. It was not a very popular ship. I wanted to put like a happy picture of Elo on this, but I've seen enough Elo this trip though, I guess, so it's fine. But this, Muninn jumped way up. It's now real popular, and this is true for a bunch of hacks. They didn't all make the same jump Muninn's did, but just the ADC was enough to bring a lot of them out of just total non-usage into having some application somewhere. So that's really cool. Another picture of what the Muninn's doing relative to some of those other hacks. This is PvP damage for all hacks. You can see in the green and blue at the bottom is where Zealot and Muninn were, where there's the big jumps. You see them spike up. Obviously Zealot not as much, even though it's picking up still in the middle there. And by now, Muninn is by far the most damaging, most active hack there is, with the rest of them settling in at about even, the Cerberus and the Ishtar there in red and orange. This looks fine. The Muninn's, again, starting to stand out more than might be ideal versus the rest of the hacks, so that might be something we have to take a look at soon. But also, it's great that it's there, and we know people like flying it, so not begging for changes anytime super soon. We also made buffs to the Cyclone and Drake Navy issue. Here's both of their PvP damage. They both picked up some activity for sure, especially the Drake Navy issue. That's good. They're actually really powerful buffs, but despite that, if you compare them still to another popular combat battlecruiser like the Hurricane, they're still pretty low down there, so there's still a lot of room to do stuff there if we want to bring them up. So last year we introduced the Monitor. This has gone well. We knew this was a super niche thing that just was for FCs and probably only certain FCs, but for those folks, it's been a super useful tool, and we've only had positive feedback basically since it's been out, so we're really happy with how that's gone. We introduced also the Praxix. I don't know if you guys can make out these fits, but I was just crawling through losses on the Praxix, and it's really fun. There's just everything imaginable. People are flying on this, and it's really popular all over space. Its usage is actually almost perfectly evenly split between high sec, low sec, wormholes, and null sec, which is pretty crazy. Most of the losses seem to be in low sec. There's a lot of PvP in it there, and you can see people are just doing all kinds of things with it. You have autocannon armor fits, and torpedo shield fits, and smart bombs, and rapid heavies, and it's pretty cool. It fits the theme of the ship really well, so this worked out great. You can see here some of its activity, how that looks compared to some other standard kind of middle-of-the-road battleships like the Dominix and the Typhoon. It's wedged right in between there, so getting plenty of use, even compared to long-standing normal Tech 1 ships. And we introduced some Triglavian ships. There's a couple highlights from those. We have around 20,000 characters that have the skills in their heads for the Triglavian ships, which is a pretty good number. We'd be happy if it was a little bit higher, I think, but it's solid. The Leshak is turning into a monster, and it's really performing super well. Very happy with that. The Damavik and Vedmak, on the other hand, probably need to do some stuff still. I'll talk about them individually here. The Damavik, we just made a buff to. We switched its slots around a little bit to hopefully make it more useful. And you can see that it is getting more use since then, but the use is still super low. It still doesn't feel like it has a clear enough role, so we are going to keep looking at that. It's a tough one to find space for. Originally, we were kind of hoping that the remote rep and utility would give it a spot in low sec, but that didn't really work out, and so we have to keep kind of poking around there. The Vedmak, on the other hand, is actually performing really well when it's used, but for both the Vedmak and the Damavik, the price just doesn't feel right. They're pretty inefficient. The cost is super high for both the weapon and the ship and the skills. So there's kind of a lot of barrier to using them, but once you get in it, it's fine. And so what we're talking about doing here is looking at ways to make them a little cheaper, and I'm gonna tell you one of the strategies we're gonna use for that in a few minutes. But yeah, the Leshak, this is a look at some of the most popular PvP ships in the game. You have the Leshak in red, the Muninn is in blue, the Ferox is in orange, and the Hurricane's in green. And you can see when the Leshak shows up in June, it just from there starts rocketing up, and now it's past most of those other ships. It's now right neck and neck with the Muninn, which is wild considering how many fewer pilots are actually using it. It's just an animal in the fleets that it's in. It's, you're seeing more and more videos of people killing caps in it. Small roaming gangs of 6 to 15 are doing really cool stuff with this ship, and that's what we were hoping for with all of them to begin with, so it's really good, and we just need to take the strengths that it's working with and try and figure out how to get them to the rest of the line. It's possible this ship ends up, once more people have their hands on it, and especially if we lower prices, because any price lowering we do for the Vedmak will probably also affect the Leshak. We may need to tone down some of the power on this if it gets out of control, but for now we're super happy with it. And let's talk a bit about what's coming up. So first of all, we told you guys we have these new ships coming, which we're really pumped about. I'm going to give you a little more specifics on them. So if you missed the keynote, this is the Kikimora. It's the Triglavian destroyer. The idea here is to go for a long-range, skirmishy destroyer, more Towery, Cormorant-y, long-range. This is the slot layout and bonus we're looking at, 2, 3, 4, so less focus on the Triglavian utility and the highs because it's going to be far away and not be able to use it. More focus on keeping up speed and getting range out of tracking computers. And then it's going to have a lot of optimal range bonus. The bonus to range is definitely the thing that is going to be the kind of tipping point for this ship. If we set the range a little too low, it's probably going to feel too vulnerable and get killed really easily by opponents and might not be that strong. If we set the range too high, it could just be oppressive because it can put out so much damage once it's charged up from long range. So we're gonna definitely be looking at a feedback stage with you guys and have to make adjustments once we see it actually played. But the potential here is really cool, and we're hoping these numbers are close at least. This one is kind of the big one in the room. The Drekavac is the battle cruiser for the Triglavians. This is what we're looking at for slots and bonuses. 447, 4% armor resistance, and then it picks up command bursts, optimal range from being a battle cruiser, and then a bigger damage bonus than the cruiser. So this ship can do a lot of stuff, whether you're bringing it as links for your skirmish gang, you're making it into just a really powerful brawler in low sec. You have a lot of options. I think this one's going to be like a little mini Leshak and should be really, really fun. Definitely the one I would buy first. Next, the Logi. These are actually not even far enough along for me to want to put numbers on the screen for you guys. We're still tuning them, but we're looking at basically, these are going to be a Tech 1 support cruiser, think of an Executor and Tech 2 counterpart like an Oniros. Like we said, the rep amount's going to ramp up. That's going to be a bonus through the ship that applies to remote reps that are fit rather than a new remote rep module. Which means these guys are going to emphasize Triglavian utility quite a bit less, but Triglavians already have really great bonuses to remote rep range, cap use for remote reps, and all of that will pass on to the Logi, so they'll be super strong. And the tactical use for them is going to be a lot different than normal Logi. I was talking with guys yesterday about having a dedicated set of Triglavian Logi for keeping up targets you know you're going to want to keep repping, like an FC or your links, and then having normal Logi for stuff that needs to switch targets quickly. That sounds really cool. I think there's a lot of other things you can do. Any static camp where you can charge up the reps before the fight starts, they're going to be really powerful. Lots of really good options. Yeah, so it's super fun. And also one thing you hear, you're only seeing, actually I have both slides for the ships, but this is actually the Tech 2 variation, the Zarmazd. The art for the Tech 1 isn't actually completely finished yet, so they wouldn't let me put it on a slide, but it will look different. All right. One thing I actually had as a reveal in the keynote and skipped on accident is that we are introducing new Mutaplasmids for both the PvP space and the co-op space, including Mutaplasmids for Disintegrators. One of the reasons we didn't introduce Mutaplasmids to begin with for turrets and weapons is that you have a whole bunch of them. Once you use a Mutaplasmid on them, they have different attributes, so you can't stack them, which is really annoying. And also, they would have different optimal ranges and different rates of fire, so it would be pretty obnoxious to manage. But Disintegrators don't have that problem. You just have one module, so there's no reason at all we can't let you use Mutaplasmids on them and change things like the damage multiplier, the range, the rate of fire, all of that stuff. So there'll be those. And speaking of damage, we're also going to be adding Mutaplasmids for damage mods. Just anxiety. When we introduced Mutaplasmids to begin with, you guys and us were both unsure of how kind of broad the impact would be and how it would feel kind of in the balance ecosystem once they were there. So we deliberately avoided stuff that scaled in any way, damage, especially tanking stats like resists. Anything that scales really hard and could have like a really dramatic effect. Now we feel a lot more comfortable. The effects so far from Mutaplasmids, I wanted to get some more stats for you guys, but we're pretty happy with what we've seen so far. It doesn't seem like it's caused any major problems, and it's definitely been something that's rewarding for small groups that are willing to invest a lot of time in theory crafting, money in getting them, and not so much of a problem for big fleets or for the meta as a whole. And so that makes us feel more comfortable to just keep adding stuff. And this is the next obvious thing. It's obviously going to be one of the most valuable things to get. And so that should be a lot of fun. Another change, like I said, we're looking a lot at cost for the Triglavian ships. There's going to be even more pressure on that cost with the new ships coming. It's going to be a lot more demand for the resources to build them. And so we needed a way to increase the output for the materials. And we could have just done that through the normal loot table, but the art guys actually were able to, here we go, make these really amazing Triglavian drilling platforms. No. So these things are now going to be scattered throughout Abyssal Dead Space. When you're going through normal runs, the asteroids and other geological features in there are going to have these platforms on them, which can also be destroyed and looted. It's going to be a tough call because any time you take to destroy and loot them is going to be time against you on the timer in Abyssal Dead Space. So you need to figure out if you have enough time to grab them, but if you do, you'll collect extra resources. That puts more of them in the game and drives down some of the cost. So pretty happy with this. Should be pretty good for prices across the board. We'll have to balance this as we see how much demand there is for the new ships. It could be that we need to keep turning up drop rates, but we'll stay close in tune with that. Next up, we have this guy. If you can hear my voice being sort of scratchy, it's because of yelling back and forth with someone about this last night at Topgolf. So we've been definitely talking about it a lot. So the idea here, and if you didn't catch it, we made just now, like in the patch 2 weeks ago or a week ago, we made a huge change to the ECM mechanic that makes it so that you can target anything that's jammed you. So if you get jammed, you can't target anything else, but you can target the ship that jammed you. And the idea here is we really wanted to move away from the really frustrating feeling of not being able to do anything when you're jammed. The tough thing about this, and something that's always made it hard to work on, is that because it's been so frustrating, over time, it's been balanced to not actually be that powerful. ECM has not been in a super powerful place for quite a while because it feels so bad to be jammed that we didn't want it to be a really prominent mechanic. So the tough thing about making it even easier to counter is that it lowers the power level even further when it already wasn't all that great. So obviously, ECM pilots are not feeling good about the strength of this module right now. And that's fine, because what we're hoping to do is, now that we have a baseline that's not as frustrating, which we need to sort of test and confirm and make sure that's true, but if it doesn't feel as frustrating to fly, we can start buffing ECM back up so it plays a larger role in the game. And we're going to take a first step towards that now, this winter, with this set of changes, which is pretty simple, but a good first step. 10% ECM strength for all jammers, 20% optimal range for all jammers, a SIG reduction for ECM ships so that they can withstand a little more damage when they're being countered, and fitting increases for some of the ECM bonus ships that have a hard time building more rounded fits. We need to work out details on some of those fitting increases still, but you can expect this for sure in winter. And this is, like I said, just a first step. We need to stay kind of close to this and follow up really iteratively till we get to a place where it feels like it's in a good spot. One of the other big considerations, we know a big topic with you guys is that ECM was one of the only kind of valid counters to fighters. And we went ahead and made the mechanic work the same for fighters as it works for players right now. But we don't necessarily have to stick to that, because obviously we're not worried about the experience for the fighters. So that's definitely something else we need to look at and figure out, see if people find another way to deal with that, where it doesn't feel like we need to go back and make kind of an arbitrary exception for fighters, or if actually that was really the best answer and we do need to put that back in. So that's something else we're looking at. And then we have these troublemakers. So I don't know how many of you are following closely on the forums and everywhere else that we're talking about ship balance, but we made a proposal maybe a month ago for an update on facts after getting just overwhelmed with extreme feedback about how oppressive they're feeling and how we really needed to do something right away. That proposal didn't go all that well. The main issues with the proposal we originally made, which I won't put the whole thing up here, but basically it was super harsh. It was something like 50% reduction in rep output, 30% reduction in local rep, and then that also it wasn't dealing with all the problems. And this is something that's been really hard when it comes to fax balance and capital balance as a whole, is that the problems are super complicated. You're talking about many different environments and applications for a lot of the ships, and it's easy to try to deal with one part of it and then have negative effect or miss any effect on other parts of it. Fax specifically, they have a really different role in wormholes and small scale fights than they do in large nullsec fights. And so, understanding that and approaching both equally is something that obviously didn't come through in the first proposal, and we want to try and work towards, even though it's definitely going to be difficult. So, as we understand and what we're working from right now, this is sort of a really high-level description of the issues that we're trying to solve. The remote rep output is just very high, which means you have an obligation to shoot the fax. You don't have any chance to do something else until all the fax are gone. On top of that, then when you do shoot them, they're too tanky, but that's kind of split into two different roles. You have active, self-sufficient fax that are showing up in wormhole fights or in other small-scale fights. There's a bunch of reasons kind of associated with that. And then you have really strong kind of throwaway passive fax in large nullsec fights as well. And those are two kind of different things. And on top of all of that, something that's coming up more and more from you guys, and I'm not going to actually put forward any changes for this right now, but the cost of capitals and how insurance works for capitals, I think, is something we need to start talking about. Obviously, it feels very affordable to throw away fax and other capitals, and so that might be something we need to visit and look at, but it's not something we want to specifically change for fax on their own, so that's going to be left out. But this is what we're talking about now for fax for this winter. Reducing the remote rep output by about 20% through the duration on the modules themselves, like on the remote rep modules. Reduce the power of capital hull energizers pretty significantly from almost immunity to only 95% resistance bonus, and then reduce the duration from 22 seconds to 16 seconds. limit capital ancillary shield boosters to 1 per ship. Mixed. And then remove the capacitor bonuses on the hulls themselves for facts. So the cap injection power bonus and the cap pool bonuses. So that hopefully there's more options to counterplay with Balgorns and other cap warfare. This is something we will have a forum thread for early this week and go through the discussion again like we showed last time. If this, again, needs more time before we go forward, that's an option. But we want to keep pushing on this and find a way to get to a better balance for facts. And then one other small update I realize this slide is so teasy. We said at FanFest that we were looking at Navy battleships next, which is true. We went in and took a look there, and there's a lot of ships that aren't getting much use at all, and there's a huge opportunity for us to improve them a lot. But there's actually so many of them, and it goes kind of all up and down the board for Navy ships. There's a lot of Navy cruisers that aren't getting much use. The Navy battle cruisers are kind of often overpriced and not super, the Hurricane maybe is one exception, but it feels like there's an opportunity here to do a broader rework, maybe do something that involves standings or some other mechanic that makes Navy ships really stand out on their own as something more special. So we're going to take a little more time here before we come back with a full rework, rather than just doing some small buffs to the least popular ships. But it's still something we're looking at for sure. And then to finish up, I just want to talk about kind of where we're headed. We've done pretty good keeping up with faster paced balance changes. That was something we said that we really wanted to do. I think we started saying that a lot last Vegas and then said it again at FanFest. That's been going pretty well. We haven't managed to hit every release with like a good chunk of balance changes, but pretty close, and we want to try and keep increasing that pace if possible. At the same time, our balance team has undergone some changes, and we don't have quite the same bandwidth. Basically, CCP Larrikin isn't working on it anymore, which is a bit of a bummer. But we're hiring folks, so we hope to be able to keep up that pace like we have been. We really like being able to hit balance really regularly, and we have a lot to do. We still have module tier side to finish up. We still have a lot of ships we want to change, and we're going to keep adding stuff, of course, as well. Another big area that we want to work on in the next few months, and it's something I brought up in the keynote, is improving our metrics and how we look at balance in the game. We are starting to do some really cool things with how we look at what people are actually using and making more educated kind of data sets for how we decide what to work on and what we decide to change. And I really want us to be expanding that to look at entire environments. We just made a change, for instance, to interceptor nullification. It's a really controversial, like a lot of different opinions about it and the effect of it and what makes the game more healthy in nullsec in terms of nullification. And I don't think we have anywhere near sophisticated enough way to measure whether or not that's true. Nullification, removing it from combat interceptors, obviously the combat interceptor activity tanked, like claw use is down 80% or something, of course. But is that good, and how can we prove it? Because like Reddit isn't a perfect mechanism for understanding if that's true. I know. The CSM isn't a perfect mechanism for understanding if that's true. We have a lot of places we can check, and we can look at overall activity in some really broad ways, but I think we really need to drill down and get some good, clear pictures of what healthy capital balance looks like, or healthy interceptor balance, or just healthy nullsec broadly. We don't have strong enough data-driven ways of saying that, and I want to work towards that a lot, and that's something we're starting to do, and you could see in some of that Abyss analysis stuff. And then speaking of capitals, obviously we have some facts changes here. I know now it's probably triggering because of the jump gate changes today, but capital balance needs a lot of attention. That's going to be a huge focus. We feel a little behind the ball in terms of understanding it well enough to make really good changes. It's very complex, but it's easy to see that Titans and supercaps in general are feeling really oppressive. There's not strong enough roles for subcaps, and there's a bunch of other issues as well. And so we really need to dig into that. It might slow down some of the other subcap work. It's pretty easy for us to keep a really high pace on the subcap work because it's more familiar. But we're going to be definitely investing heavily in trying to figure out the cap situation as much as possible. And on top of that, of course, we'll keep adding new stuff. We're really excited to be adding Precursor, the first Tech 2 non-Empire ship, to be adding more than 3 ships to a new faction. And we have a long way to go there. We want to keep fleshing out what there is in the Precursor lineup. We have ideas for new mechanics, more Tech 2 ships, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to be doing that as well. So hopefully a lot to look forward to. Thanks a lot. We're going to have a roundtable tomorrow afternoon. I hope by then all of you are too tired from partying to really, but yeah, there is. Tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. So I look forward to seeing you guys there. Thanks. See ya.